those people, you're like, no. And you can choose to have the conversation. You can just say, no, I don't need to talk to somebody as my physician. I'm putting my life in your hands, whether it's immediate or whether it's, down the line. If I hadn't caught my prostate cancer when it was still microscopic, I might not be here because I'm a 20-year survivor. I've got to be able to trust the doctor. If I don't have trust, that's it. Nothing else matters if you don't have trust with a clinician. So anytime that happens, whether it's a year in or in the first sessions, that's the time frame from my point of view. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. I do a project where I work with victims of gun violence who become disabled. And I recently had an interview where this person has literally hopped to 3 different hospital structures because they didn't explain to him what was happening with his body, and he's correctly than him actually being shot.
Exactly. And what I will tell you about that, having been in healthcare for a long time, that is inexcusable. Okay? And I used to be a director of healthcare policy. So I would take issues like that and say, all right, what do we do about it? I was on the ethics committee for my health plan, and we got an issue like that. All right, how do we make sure that doesn't happen in our facility? We want to advocate so it doesn't happen anywhere, but we got control over us. No patient walking in should have that experience. So what I is each patient talk to advocates so they can help other patients. And if you've got a healthcare system, say I'm with Access Health, their network was here, right? If I got a problem with a facility that's part of health, I want to let that facility know, but I also want to let Access Health know, because you can't correct what you don't know. You can tell by now I love quotes. Well, here's one of my absolute favorite people, James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be overcome, but nothing can be overcome until it is faced. So if you have to hold up your story in front of that medical director, say, you can force them to face it. It doesn't mean they're going to change a damn thing, right? You don't necessarily have power over them, but you can force them to face it. And if you've got the time and energy, you can take it up the ladder, or you can find somebody else to take it up the ladder, right? Every organization has a board of directors. They're responsible for everything that happens in that institution. If you go to a community health center, which have been some of my favorite clients over the years, more than half the members of their board are patients at that health center because the feds require that. Most places that's nothing like that, right? So if you look at a board, say you go to Erie Family Health Center, just to choose somebody. I know they're not in this area, but what's a local health center around here?
Northwestern.
Okay, Northwestern. Okay. So I go to Northwestern Community Health Center. I get some care that I think is inappropriate. I can look on their board of directors and see if there's anybody I know or somebody who knows somebody, right? Because half the people are going to be patients. If I can find that person and talk to that person about what happened, they probably have more power than you can imagine, okay? And not only do they have power, you can go to the feds. Federally qualified health centers get money from the federal government every year, every quarter. And they're required to do things right. And if they screw up, they can be, the most severe punishment would be that the feds could say, we're going to kick you out of the program, or we're going to suspend you from the program. That doesn't happen very often. But an inspection by HRSA, that does happen. And let me tell you, it's a little like, it's a little like a digital rectal exam. Not fun, but that's quick and it's over, right? Mammogram, it may not be fun, but it doesn't take very long. One of these exams, they take a while, okay? And they send in several people to look for what's really happening in this institution.
How,
interview your patients, etc.
how often do people go through that, or is it just a complaint basis? Like, is it an annual thing? Do people do that?
Okay, there are a couple different things. There's sort of a paper review that happens annually, but this sort of on-site inspection is usually just triggered by an incident. On the other hand, if you're at a hospital, they usually have an exam at least every 3 years. If you've been really good, every 5 years. They will send in a whole team to see what's really happening in your institution.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Please.
That also apply to nursing homes by any chance?
Nursing homes have a similar process because anybody who receives Medicare or Medicaid dollars is under federal restrictions, and nursing homes certainly do. So there are both state and federal regulations and inspectors that do this work, absolutely.
What
Yes,
about
please.
dentists?
Say
What
again?
about dentists?
Dentists, yes, that's interesting. I call dentists and oral health in general sort of the stepchildren of healthcare. They and behavioral health, they are not treated as seriously as we need to. I've had some major dental work done, okay? I know how important it is, but many people who haven't had that don't get that oral health is connected to your total health, just like behavioral health is. You can't be optimally healthy if you're dealing with an untreated depression. You can't be optimally healthy if you're dealing with a painful molar that needs to be treated. Maybe needs to be extracted, but maybe can be saved. Oral health and behavioral health are treated like stepchildren, but they're very important. And yes, there are inspectors and so forth for oral health as well. Not as strong in many cases, don't come out as often. I mean, I know dentists who literally tell me, I won't see a Medicaid patient, I'll see that patient and not charge them. Because what it takes me to go through a Medicaid billing process costs me more than Medicaid's gonna reimburse me. I'd rather just give away the care than go through Medicaid. And that's in many states, it's terrible.
So, but there is like a number you can call. And when you call that number, they'll do like an inspection. Is that?
Well, let me be honest, okay? How responsive the folks answering the phone are varies a lot. But what you have to realize, if you don't get satisfaction with the first call, find somebody else. Find an advocate who maybe can make that call for you. Find an advocate who's got 20 examples of exactly what you're talking about. Because if I'm getting 20 complaints against the same dentist, I can do something different than if I'm just hearing from you, okay? So all those kinds of advocacy are part of what you can do. People say, well, what's one vote? Well, one vote could be the difference, right? One complaint could trigger an investigation that gets that dentist's license removed or suspended. You don't know. So it's not up to you to solve all the problems, but do what you can, but first of all for yourself, right? You can take care of other people, but take care of your problem first. Okay? Where am I time-wise? I have no clue. I'm not watching my watch.
It's been 28 minutes.
28 minutes, all right. We still got another dozen minutes to go. Let me go back to the slide deck briefly, but as I said, the slides don't matter to me nearly as much as the conversation. So when we talk about racism, we often think about only one piece of it, but there are 4 levels of racism I want to talk to you about. Do you have a question first?
Yes. So this says that the class is supposed to end at 12. Did they change it? Because it's 12:04.
I was told I had 40 minutes, but you're right, we started late.
11:20.
You're right, we started late. So let me ask you guys what you want me to do. Because right now I'm eating into your lunchtime. Lunchtime is supposed to start at high noon.
Yeah.
So can we spend another 10 minutes, wrap things up?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, let me just set my timer for 10 minutes because you can
No,
tell.
I got
it's a
you. I
bit
can
long.
remind you.
Say again?
I can remind you.
Okay, cool. Remind me in 10 minutes, please. So, I think this one is really important. I'm just going to touch on it. We talk about racism. We generally talk about the one-on-one racism, right? Somebody calls you something, somebody treats you badly, whatever. That's individually mediated racism. And especially in the doctor's office, that's usually unconscious. Somebody who goes to be a doctor or a nurse doesn't usually want to treat you differently because of who you are. Some do. I mean, there are racist doctors out there, right? There are classist doctors, there are ableist doctors. But most of the time it's unconscious. So that's a lot of the focus we work on, is how to deal with unconscious. But there are three other kinds. There is internalized racism, right? We've all grown up with all sorts of negative messages about black people. And if you get taught with that, some of that's going to soak in. And you have to fight that off. Because when it becomes internalized, it's very damaging. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But remember, that's the second form. And most white people don't know that internalized racism exists. If you don't know if it exists, you can't be an ally to help us defeat it. If you're a teacher who doesn't realize that some of your students are going to be accused of acting white because the students who are accusing them have internalized racism, you can't help those students who are being accused. The third and fourth ones really go together. Sometimes people combine them. Institutionalized racism and structural racism. The way I distinguish institutionalized is at an individual institution. Okay? If I have a hospital and the only place you see people who look like you and me are in housekeeping and maintenance and food service, that says the hospital doesn't believe that there are doctors and nurses and everybody else who looks like us who are qualified to serve. That's institutionalized racism. When I talk about structural racism, I'm talking about the new Jim Crow. I'm talking about how easy it is for black young men in particular, but black and brown and other oppressed folks to be on the school to prison pipeline. That's beyond any one given institution. That is structural racism, okay? So all four of those exist, and we need to fight on all four levels, and that includes in healthcare, okay? Things have changed a lot. The AMA didn't used to allow black physicians to become members. Now the AMA is a head of health equity, you know? Very, very big differences, but still, we've come a long way, we've got a long way to go. All forms of oppression can be deadly, but in the healthcare situation, the one where we can have the most impact is against that unconscious bias. That's why the tools that I just told you about are all about, primarily about addressing unconscious bias. Doing the teach back to make sure you're on the same page. Humanizing yourself so it's harder for the doctor to just dismiss you based on what they see of you. They're to address unconscious bias, racism, ableism, all those. Okay. Oh my goodness. I'm just looking at this slide because it's got a lot on it. Let me pin it down. Okay. It's been well identified for a long time that medical racism exists. Medical ableism has been there just as long, but it's not as often talked about. Okay. All those forms of oppression that you just identified, they all exist. And if you're in more than one category, you're going to be affected by more than one, and often they're synergistic. I mean, that's why black women are hurt so much, because they're both black and women. You know, and if you have a disability as well, I mean, all those things come together, and they're often not just additive, they're synergistic. They make the discrimination and the damage worse, okay? I've done some work with this with my mentor, Gus White. Anybody wants to read an academic paper, send me an email. I'm glad to send you the actual papers. And I'm giving you the bottom line of it, which is clinicians can do their own work, but most of them have not done and will not do their own work. So it's up to you to protect yourself using techniques like that. That's the bottom line of that. We're now really working hard to try and get hospitals, health centers, and others to do this work with their clinicians, because they're responsible for how you get treated as a patient, you know? And if you don't understand that, maybe we need to have the feds come in and explain that to you, okay?
Are there many rights for people with disabilities though? Like I heard you mention ADA in our introduction.
Yep.
But like, we still so far behind in time. We can't even get like wheelchairs to hold our wheelchairs as a part of our body. And so I'm just curious, is there any movement outside of being able to look at us as a whole person psychologically and in conversation, but some of the prognosis and treatment plans and various things like that are not accommodating? And so I'm just curious, is there any update considering that everyone in 5 person with a disability?
It is,
One in
like I
5.
said, I'm an old school guy, and I'm a
Yeah.
history guy, like you are. So I look at how far we've come and how far we have to go,
Yeah.
right? We can go to any school, we can go to virtually any facility if we've got decent coverage, and almost all of us have some coverage. But when it comes to people with disabilities, particularly with visible disabilities, a lot of institutions have not made the adjustments that we know are reasonable.
Yeah.
I think one of the best things we can do is to highlight those that are doing the right thing, right? Vote with your feet. If somebody really, make sure every entrance is accessible, right? Has signage in different languages. Make sure that you can get to a clinician that really understands your condition and the whole of you. There are institutions who are doing better at that than others. We ought to frequent those, we ought to trumpet those, and yes, try and push on those who aren't there to improve. Long way to go. There are many more advocacy organizations than there used to be. Like I said, I'm a prostate cancer survivor. I headed an organization called Us Too that was a national group. It's now part of a larger national group called Zero, the End of Prostate Cancer. And so one of the issues we deal with a lot is disability, because prostate cancer can be a very disabling condition. So it's part of what we do, even if we aren't a disability organization. That's, I think, one of the most powerful things for us to do, is we have organizations that are interested in the same issues. We need to work together. Why shouldn't the Urban League, for example, have a health,
I'm saying Lord
Okay.
because, no, I'm
Go ahead.
not
Go ahead.
the Urban League. The issues that I have with organizations that represent lives is they usually leave disability out of conversation.
Yeah.
So when we looking at economics, or we looking at stats, or we looking at just very institutional things, when you talk about ableism and biases, we not even included in the count.
I get it. And let me tell you, this is better than it was and has a long way to go. But
Yes.
you remember what Shirley Chisholm said? If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring your folding chair.
So
Okay, so-
we bring our rolling chairs, and I'm not negating what you're saying. I'm just saying that it's frustrating to continue to be left out of conversations that impact you so dramatically.
I couldn't agree more. Yes, bring your rolling chairs, because there's a hell of a lot more work to be done. I understand that frustration. You remember 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, desegregate the schools with all deliberate speed. Well, here we are almost 70 years later, and there are a lot of schools who are more segregated now than they were then, okay? Now, maybe black and brown people together, but it still means if you only have BIPOC people in the system, just like if you only have poor people in the system, you're not going to get the same level of service as if you have a more integrated system. So to me, you got to push on both sides. You got to say we deserve the same level of care as anybody else, and we also want integration. That's my point of view. Yes.
But did you know that the American Disability Act was born from the Civil Rights Act?
Inspired.
Yeah, did you know that?
Oh, I absolutely know that. I mean, I was there, not live, but I was there when George Bush signed it. I know a lot of the history behind it. And I will tell you that the movements for civil rights and women's rights have really deep roots, and they're international.
Yeah.
I mean, King and Gandhi taught each other a lot of stuff. And yes, the disabilities movement, all the movements that are based on opposing oppression have learned a lot from each other. Absolutely. You give me the sign that I'm spent 10 minutes?
Yeah, it's one.
Okay. Let me see if there's anything else critical before I let you guys. I covered that stuff. It's QA and comments, which we've been doing a lot of.